Well, it really can't get much worse than this. While some people are very concerned about the damage that unserious primary challengers may cause to Joe Biden, I'll get to more on that later, they should be more concerned about how terrible their own candidate is, as recent polling out showcases that he would just barely defeat a convicted felon in a national poll, which would mean he would still likely lose the election. Check this out.
We did ask this question, Kristen. If one of these cases this year ends in a conviction, a felony conviction for former President Trump, would that change your vote? 45% said in that scenario, they vote for Biden, 43% for Trump. This is also something the Biden campaign obviously hoping for, although there's a long history in polling of asking folks about hypotheticals and them actually reacting a little differently when it actually happens.
A little bit of a game changer, but still incredibly close.
A game changer, she says. I will get to how this is not a game changer. I mean, the 2% on the board should be obvious, but I'll help you understand why this national poll ultimately is not good for Joe Biden, despite the semi-praise they're giving him here. But the initial poll before the convicted felon part was added into it was Trump winning by 47 to 42. And again, this is national polling. I'll get to why this doesn't really matter. And then after the conviction, Biden narrowly is winning by 45 to 43. So this was 2020. National polling in 2020. At the very end, right before the end of the election, you have here, or right before the election, Biden leading Trump nationally by 8.4%. That resulted in this. Barely winning. And I say barely because look at these states that he flipped. 49.4 to 48.8. 50.6 to 47.8. 50 to 48.8. 49.4 to 49. 49.5 to 49.2. These are states that right now Biden is losing to Trump in this hypothetical matchup with these swing states. This is why I say, national polling gives you an idea where people stand nationally, but ultimately when it comes to a general election, what matters is the electoral college. Winning these states is the only thing that matters. So this is actually a poll from December showing Biden losing every swing state. And let's get to the updated one here. This is from 5 days ago from Bloomberg and Morning Consult, and showing Biden still losing every single swing state. Though some slight variations, but he's still losing every single swing state. This is where we get to this next video here from MSNBC. So I am constantly, I guess amazed is the wrong word because they're always getting shit wrong. But just, it's incredible to see people in positions of power who are worried about the future of democracy, worried about the country, worried about the world, so concerned or concerned at all about the handful of people that are attempting to primary Joe Biden, who of course are not very successful so far. Like, I'm going to show you this clip. This is Dean Phillips on MSNBC, who just recently got whooped, in his own words, in South Carolina to Joe Biden. And I'm going to get to some of the reactions of the panel and just the way they are talking down to Dean Phillips, who, look, Dean Phillips, from what I've read, from what I've seen of him, is actually worse than Joe Biden is on a number of issues. So I'm not here to defend Dean Phillips, but I am here to defend just his act of primarying Joe Biden. This is the very thing they are so afraid of, yet their own candidate right now is on the path to a massive loss. Check this out.
So the chairman in me.
the strategist and the chairman, yes.
The chairman in me says, what the hell are you doing?
Sure.
Right? And why are you doing it? Are you creating a drain in the process, prolonging the narratives around his age, prolonging the narratives around other things that people are distracted by with Joe Biden, when the real threat is the man across the aisle in Donald Trump? And the polling shows at the end of the day, Donald Trump is going to lose to Joe Biden.
All right. First of all, no, the polling does not show that. I will get to Dean Phillips and his overall reaction to all of this because he has a pretty good defense of himself. But Dean Phillips does not have the power to prolong any narratives about Joe Biden when Dean Phillips got 1.7% in South Carolina against Joe Biden in that primary. No one's listening to Dean Phillips. If they were, maybe they'd be voting for him. But he's not. His existence in this primary is just him participating in democracy. And again, I think on paper, he is worse than Biden is. In reality, I think he'd probably have a better chance at beating Trump than Biden is, but he would have to get to the general, and getting to the general is the hardest part. So that's not going to happen. But all Dean Phillips is trying to do with his run is try to wake some people up to reality of how weak of a candidate Joe Biden is, especially post October 7th, and just the cozying up that Biden has done with a far, far right genocidal government in Israel. This has only hurt him. And Biden was already underperforming before October 7th. He's doing even worse now with the voters that he needs, including voters of color, voters in Michigan, young people, across the board in the most important numbers, the ones that got him the victory in 2020. That's where he's losing support. So even when you're even polling 2% over a convicted felon, meaning you would lose in the general because he had to get 8% in national polling to defeat him in 2020, it shows how weak of a candidate Biden is and why it's very important for not only these random primary challengers to do what they're doing, but even more important for those with a platform, a voice, an ear to the Democratic Party, an ear to Biden's campaign. Like these people in media on MSNBC, it's even more important for them to engage in this conversation and try to do something, whether it's completely push the Biden campaign into a direction that would allow them to maybe get some of these voters back, or better yet, just replace them. I know it's late. We're already in the primary process, but man, this is they have set themselves up for disaster, and it's really, they have to just hope to God there are enough people who are not answering these polls, who are, somehow not part of the math. There's going to be enough people who didn't vote or are not voters that are going to come out to vote for Joe Biden. And I'm saying that because a lot of this polling relies on existing voters. That's why a lot of the polling back in 2016 was so off, because a lot of people came out who didn't normally vote and they voted for Donald Trump. Biden doesn't have that kind of, mass appeal. It's very unlikely, especially his second time around, that he's going to get those kinds of voters out for him. All the more reason why he should be doing a completely different, shift in terms of what his administration is doing in regards to Israel, but also just generally. Like, there's got to be something else here. I want to play for you, though, Dean Phillips and his defense of his own primary challenge.
It's a mission of principle, and I know tradition dictates that you always protect the incumbent. But I'm a Democrat who wants to win. And yes, he's dominating in the Democratic primary so far. I get it. But look at not the national numbers, as you just referenced. Look at the state numbers. Look at the lowest approval numbers in history. You know that Jimmy Carter was at 58% in January of 1980? Joe Biden's at 38%. You see the battlegrounds, all 7 of them. I'm just trying to wake up our party. We are the progressive party. We should be moving forward. And let's bring some energy and wake up our party and get young people energized. 4% turnout yesterday in South Carolina. 4%. Yes, it is a whooping. But my goodness, people are apathetic. They are staying home. They don't care. We got to wake people up. I'm trying to inspire a party right now. And a coronation, in my estimation, is the worst way to invite.
Dean Phillips, I hate to say it, is exactly right. A primary process brings new voters into the voting process, making them more likely to vote in a general election. Primaries are good for democracy. They're good for the party. This is all Dean Phillips is trying to raise here. Like, the points he makes, they're irrefutable. State turnout, 4%. Like, sure, this looks terrible for everybody except for Biden, but 4% turnout? This tells you nothing in terms of the results in a general election. This is why state by state, these sorts of polls, these polls are the only polls that matter. Looking at swing states and where people are in these swing states. That's what is going to give you a better idea of what will happen in a general election. But low state turnout, historically low approval numbers. No president has ever won re-election in the 30s. Biden is there, has been there for a while. And, just overall low turnout and terrible polling really showcases this is not a good candidate. And I know this is not news to anybody, but it's just this continues to be the biggest issue for democracy moving forward, because you don't want someone who tried to steal an election win the presidency again. But when you have a president who is currently supporting a genocide, not even supporting it, helping to fund a genocide, like, you're kind of putting people in a tough spot, aren't you? So I dread doing videos like this because they're never fun to talk about how crazy shit is and where things currently are going. But it's important to be aware of where things stand, of where voters stand. And if things don't change, if the Democratic Party doesn't change and it doesn't, the new immigration bill, I could have talked about that too, but like moving further right, trying to pass things that Republicans would have happily passed, 8 years ago, to be putting forward legislation that is far right, to be supporting far right governments abroad, to not be doing anything to address, low wages, the cost of living, actual issues that people are dealing with on a daily basis, the cost of healthcare, to do nothing or very little, to be fair, very little on some of these issues, is not going to be enough to get you a victory, especially when you are losing, as I said, a lot of young people, and the people that got you the victory in 2020, when you were losing them with your support of a genocide.